Hello and welcome back. And I just got back from seeing the new Saw film, Saw 9 or Spiral, the Book of Saw. Oh, I'm sorry, Spiral from the Book of Saw. Seriously, what is up with that name? Could you not just call it Spiral? Or how about just call it Saw 9? Why do these sequels always have to come up with dumb alternative names? Like when one of the Rocky movies was just called Rocky Balboa. Just call it the numerical sequel that it is. I know that this is a spin-off, but it's seriously annoying. Just call it Saw 9. That's what I'm gonna call it. Anyway, so I think that there are few out there that were as hyped for this movie as I was. I'm a huge Saw fan. I love this series. It's one of my all-time favorite horror franchises, and it is my opinion that Jigsaw is the greatest horror icon on the film side of things. And when I heard that we were going to be getting Saw 9, I was really excited because I've always been excited every time there's a new Saw movie. I have never really gotten the hate and bad reviews that the Saw franchise gets. I think they're all great movies, with 6 being my personal favorite, but the first one probably being the best. But that's besides the point. How does this one stack up? So, a little bit of backstory. Apparently, this movie was an idea by Chris Rock. When I first heard that this movie was going to have Chris Rock in it, I did kind of raise an eyebrow, but I was a little bit intrigued. So apparently, Chris Rock is a huge Saw fan, and this was a script idea that he pitched to Lionsgate, and apparently they liked it. So this is Chris Rock's version of Saw. And I am a tad bit skeptical on how much of a fan he claims to be, but I'll get to that a little later. So apparently this is a spin-off of sorts and has nothing to do with the main storyline. Okay, I guess, because the main storyline is finished, I suppose, although I wouldn't mind getting a continuation of that. Maybe one where Gordon takes up the mantle as Jigsaw. Who knows? We are supposed to be getting Saw 10. Maybe that will carry on the main storyline. Who knows? But this one is essentially Saw meets 7. On a brief little tangent, what is up with these spin-offs of long-running horror franchises and always feeling the need to copy 7? Hellraiser did it, and even Final Destination do it. It's a little thing I've noticed. I'm not necessarily saying it's a bad thing, I just don't understand why they feel the need to do that. Although, if I am being fair, a Saw movie knocking off 7 isn't the worst idea in the world, because the Saw franchise, contrary to popular belief, has always been sort of a mystery horror thriller kind of franchise anyway, so it actually fits more at home in this series than something like, say, Hellraiser. So, what does Chris Rock have to offer with this idea? Well, the story follows a detective named Ezekiel, or Zeke for short, as the people in the precinct call him. He is a detective slash police officer living in the shadow of his father, played by Samuel L. Jackson. Yes, Sam motherfucking Jackson is in a Saw movie. I'm not gonna lie, I kind of love it just for the novelty alone. I never imagined that Sam Jackson would ever be in a Saw movie, but it's here, and it goes without saying, he's entertaining. Sam Jackson is Sam Jackson, and it works. And Chris Rock is fairly entertaining as well. So essentially, going back to the storyline, it gets revealed that there is a new Jigsaw copycat that is targeting police officers and putting them in Jigsaw-inspired games, and Ezekiel has to hunt down this copycat and stop him from doing any more games and killing any more police officers. Now, I will admit, I have a lot of mixed feelings about this film, and I have a lot to say about it. And it's difficult to think of where to begin. Apparently, Chris Rock wanted to take more of a comedic approach and turn this into sort of a kind of black comedy, sort of. And on a side note, why is it that people feel like the only way to keep a horror franchise from becoming stale is by turning it into a comedy, essentially? They did that with Nightmare on Elm Street. They did that with Jason. Like, why do they feel the need to do this? Why can't Saw just remain a serious mystery soap opera? I don't get it. I've never understood this mentality. I don't think that comedy really belongs in the Saw franchise, if you ask me. As a longtime Saw fan, I don't want Saw to become a black comedy. It's fine the way that it is. And the comedy elements of this film are ironically some of the weakest points, but I'll get to that in a moment. So, I guess I'll start off with the positives of this movie, because the negatives outweigh the positives on this one, but I will start off with the positives. First things first, the story. I actually like the idea of what Chris Rock was going for. Essentially, this story follows the whole thing of corrupt police officers, and this new Jigsaw copycat is hell-bent on kidnapping police officers and putting them in games to teach them a lesson. And that's essentially the main motivation of this new Jigsaw killer, is wanting to punish police officers, which isn't too far out of place from what the real Jigsaw would do. Going back to Saws 2 and 4, where the main games revolved around Officer Eric Matthews and Officer Rigg. So I actually kind of like that. And the whole plot line of corrupt police officers and police brutality is actually very topical, and it works quite well. I do like the idea of a Saw movie where it criticizes police brutality and corrupt police forces. I really like it. I just wish that it was executed a tad bit better. I love the idea, but the story just kind of is weak, if you ask me. There are some great moments. There's even a reference to the Philando Castile situation, if you could believe it. And believe it or not, it's actually not cringy or preachy, and it's very well done. It's just there. They don't call a lot of attention to it. There's just a scene with a corrupt police officer, and it plays out exactly like what went down with Philando Castile. It's not the exact same thing, but it's essentially the same premise. A police officer pulls someone over, they get agitated, and someone dies, and that police officer ends up later being punished for his actions. I actually like that. Little touches like that really elevate the story. And the characters, for the most part, are pretty solid. Chris Rock's character is pretty good, being this good cop that wants to just do good, and one of his main issues is that he ended up turning in a bad cop, and now he has sort of a bad reputation around the police precinct as this sort of snitch, essentially. And it works very well, and his father is, for what little we get of him, is an interesting character. He's a police chief that does some questionable things and is trying to maintain the integrity of the police force, and is very protective of his son, and we find that out in some flashbacks, which leads to some interesting moments. Most of the cast is pretty solid. Although, my main misgiving, but I'll get to that in the negatives, is the Jigsaw copycat doesn't work for me. In fact, there's a lot of things about this that don't work for me, but I'll get to those in a minute. Another thing I like is it does go back to more of the mystery approach, which is what the original Saw film was a mystery movie. And the crazy editing that Saws 1 through 7 were known for is back, and I missed it. That editing was mostly absent in Jigsaw, and I for the life of me can't figure out why that is. But it's back, and it looks pretty good in some areas, but there are some areas where it doesn't work. Let's see, what else for positives? The soundtrack is pretty solid when it's not using garbage hip-hop and other pop music that just is unnecessary. But when it's using actual Saw-themed music, it is very good. The iconic Saw theme is back, and it's just as good as ever. However, you only really hear it in the final part of the film, but when it is there, it's really great. And the cinematography and overall look of the film is pretty solid. There is a polished look to it. Personally, I would have preferred they went for more of that low-budget indie film. I kind of missed that, because that was what helped kind of make the Saw franchise's identity, was that kind of low-budget look. Now, that might be a weird thing, but personally for me as a Saw fan, I just kind of missed that. And ever since Jigsaw, they're trying to make the films more polished and mainstream, which I get. You want to appeal to mainstream audiences, and you want the films to look good. It's not necessarily a bad thing. Let's see, what else is there for positives? Some of the traps are pretty interesting. For example, there is this glass-themed trap that is actually very brutal and got me turning my head and cringing. Very good. There's another interesting trap that revolves around someone having to pull off their fingers, which is very brutal and interesting. And there's also another unique trap that involves hot wax. So the traps, for the most part, are pretty solid. There's only one trap I could think of that's kind of weak, that involves a tongue and having to do a certain thing in time or be hit by a train. I'm not sure what they were really going for with that one. It's not so much a trap, necessarily, so much as it's do X or you'll be run over by a train. I don't know. But I think that's it for the positives, at least right off the top of my head. Oh yeah, there are some nice references and callbacks to the original movies. So when those are there, they're pretty good, but there are also some callbacks that are really stupid and just kind of make you scratch your head. But that's it for positives. The negatives, that's a whole nother story. The first thing I want to get out of the way is the new Jigsaw copycat. He's not an apprentice of Jigsaw, he's just some Jigsaw wannabe. And right out the gate, the first thing that bothers me is this dude's voice. What the hell is up with this guy's voice? You're telling me he couldn't copy the iconic Jigsaw voice? Really? Like, all of Jigsaw's apprentices were able to copy his voice. Why can't this guy? His voice sounds so stupid, cheesy, and wimpy. It just makes every single time you see this new Jigsaw, it's difficult to take him seriously when he sounds like a freaking teenager. My God, what were they thinking with the voice? I know this seems like a small thing, but that Jigsaw voice is iconic. And when you don't have it, it's a huge problem. In fact, when I heard that this movie wasn't going to have Tobin Bell in it at all, I was immediately nervous. Because for me, if you don't have Tobin Bell in your Saw movie, what the hell are you doing? Tobin Bell was one of the main things that made the Saw franchise so iconic, because he cared a lot about the character of John Kramer, and he put a lot of effort into bringing that character to life. And when you remove him, it's a huge problem. Yes, I get it. John Kramer's dead, and the only way you can bring him back is through flashbacks. But when you can't even be bothered to have John Kramer there in spirit by having this new Jigsaw wannabe copy his voice, is frustrating. If his apprentices could do it, why can't this loser do it? It just makes him come off as a really bad Jigsaw knockoff. And I get that that's part of the point. Like, is the whole voice thing supposed to be funny? Because I'm not laughing, it's just making me facepalm every time this guy is on screen. And the motivation of the new Jigsaw is fine, I guess. But his overall plan makes no damn sense. And I'm going to try to keep this spoiler free, but if you've seen the movie, you might know what I'm talking about. I don't understand what the hell this dude's plan is. It just doesn't make much sense. I mean, I know that he wants to reform the police, but the way he plans on accomplishing that is just a little bit head-scratching. Also, the story just falls apart because the mystery angle just falls apart really quickly, because they try to give you a bunch of red herrings, but it's pretty easy to see where the storyline is going, and there's no plot twist to keep things interesting. There's an attempt at a plot twist towards the end during the final game, but it just doesn't work for me. And without a plot twist, it just makes the whole mystery storyline fall flat on its face. And at that point, all you have left is the trap plot. And there isn't really much of a trap plot until the end. What we mostly get is the main character following the kills. He goes to a crime scene. He'll see a kill. They'll figure out what's going on. They'll try to piece together hints to figure out what's going on. The killer will send some kind of gift or package to the main character, rinse and repeat. And we only get a kind of trap plot towards the end. The Saw movies, usually the trap plot was one of the main plot lines, but we don't get that here. And while we're at it, I know I said that I was happy that they bring back a lot of the stuff from the old Saw movies. Like, for example, they do the whole thing of, like, in the first Saw film, they would investigate the crime scene first, and then you would find out what happened to the victim. Which I kind of like. It goes back to more traditional Saw. But, like I said, while I am happy that the crazy editing is back, there are parts where it just makes no sense. Like, there's just a random scene where a character is just sitting there talking in a room with a bunch of other police officers, and then it just cuts to Chris Rock making a crazy face with the editing, and it makes no sense. Or there's a scene where Chris Rock is in his car, and he's angry about something, slamming his fists on the car, and they're doing the whole crazy rapid editing, and it doesn't make any sense. The whole point of that editing is they were mostly used for the trap sequences, and it was meant to help emphasize the chaos and the chaotic nature of what the victims of the people going through these traps were experiencing. And while you get that somewhat in some of the traps, there are just points of this movie where it just makes no frickin' sense. And while we're at it of things that make no sense, there are some things that the main character says that makes no sense. For example, the main character says, "No, this isn't Jigsaw. Jigsaw never targeted cops." And I'm over here as a Saw fan thinking, what the hell are you on about, Chris Rock? If you're supposed to be a Saw fan, then you would know that Jigsaw did target police officers. In the second Saw movie, the main trap plot line revolved around Officer Eric Matthews, or in the fourth one where he targets Rig from the first three movies, and the main trap plot lines revolved around those two characters. So it makes no sense. Now sure, the character might not be aware of that. Well, actually no, it doesn't even make any sense for the character to know that, because the character would have to be aware of this, because again, it was well known that Jigsaw went after Eric Matthews and went after Eric Rig, and Rig and Matthews both died in these Saw traps, so I don't understand that. It makes me question, what is Chris Rock doing? Is he supposed to be a Saw fan or not? I feel like no self-respecting Saw fan would have made that mistake. And it just makes no sense. It makes an actual Saw fan like me annoyed. And not only that, but in Jigsaw, there was another cop that was targeted by Jigsaw's apprentice in that movie. So what is this dude on? Is he just not aware of the events of those films? Like, I know this is a spin-off, but if you're going to make callbacks to the main plot line from Saws 1 through 7, plus Jigsaw, can you at least have them make sense and don't make the character look like a complete moron? And while we're at it, another huge thing that doesn't work for me is the comedy. Now, Chris Rock said he wanted to insert comedy into the Saw series, and the comedy is easily the weakest element because all it amounts to is just pointless references, like a "what you talking about, Willis" reference, or when the main character just pointlessly references Twilight for no reason. What is up with these movies and always feeling like they have to reference things from pop culture? It's just annoying. I didn't like it when the MCU movies did it, and I don't like it when the Saw movies do it. If this is your attempt to make the Saw franchise more humorous, then please never try this again. Saw and comedy doesn't work together, or if you're gonna have it be funny, can you have jokes that actually make sense? The jokes in this film suck. The only parts of the movie that actually managed to get any kind of chuckle out of me was with Sam Jackson, because he's doing his Sam Jackson thing. That got a smile out of me, but that's about it, and it only amounted to a smirk. This movie didn't get a single laugh out of me. All it did was make me facepalm. So the humor sucks, okay? If you're going to go into this movie expecting to laugh, don't even bother. It just doesn't work. Which is ironic considering that Chris Rock works with comedy. You would think that Chris Rock being Chris Rock, he's a very funny guy, and he can't come up with any funny jokes. Like, are you serious, Chris Rock? Is this the best you can do? I don't know how much of this is Chris Rock's fault. Supposedly this is his script, but maybe it got messed up by some writers that got a hold of it. I don't know, but as it stands, this script just doesn't work for me. And I don't know, there's just so much about this movie that just doesn't work for me. Even the final sequence doesn't really feel all that climactic. Everything feels kind of anticlimactic. There are some interesting stuff in it, but I don't know. And don't get me started on the pointless uses of hip-hop. Stop, okay? Just stop. Keep your garbage hip-hop away from my Saw movies, okay? It sucks and it's out of place. Stop it. Just have someone either imitate Charlie Clouser soundtracks or just get Charlie Clouser to do his thing. Don't insert random pop soundtracks into it. It's dumb. I hate it. In fact, The whole opening sequence is just lame because it just mostly focuses on Chris Rock doing an inside job with these gangbangers, and that just goes on for like the first 10 minutes. And at first I thought I walked into the wrong movie theater because it doesn't even feel like a Saw movie. Like, what are you doing? I get that this is meant to establish Ezekiel's character, but could you not do this in a better way? I get that he's supposed to be one of those cops that infiltrates criminals and all that, but come on. I don't know with this movie. I mean, I really wanted to like this movie. I did, but there's just so much about it that just doesn't work. It is an extremely mixed bag, and even the whole spin-off excuse can only work so far in having me suspend some of my misgivings that I'm going to have as a longtime Saw fan. Another aspect to this movie that frustrates me is pretty much any time someone is in a trap, they always fail, so nobody ever learns a lesson. The whole point of the Jigsaw Killer, contrary to popular belief, is he's not out to kill you, he's out to rehabilitate you. He wants to teach people the meaning of life. And you don't get any of that in this. One of the most intriguing elements of the Saw franchise for me is the philosophy of Jigsaw himself. It is extremely fascinating. And this new Jigsaw copycat, nope, he just wants to kill police officers. He's not actually interested in teaching them a lesson. Like, what are we doing here, people? Like, how do you fail this badly? I mean, I'm the person who gave Jigsaw a pass. Like, I know a lot of people said that Jigsaw was like really bad. I personally liked Jigsaw. I didn't have much of a problem with it. But with this movie, the problems just keep piling on. I like that it feels a lot more like a Saw film than Jigsaw. It definitely goes back to its roots in some areas, but whenever it tries something new, it just doesn't work for me. And I really did want to like this. But for me, this might be my least favorite Saw film. I don't know. Only time will tell. Maybe someday, when this comes out on DVD, I'll marathon all the Saw movies and see how I feel about it on a second viewing. But if you're a longtime Saw fan, this movie might just irritate you, because it teases you by bringing back a lot of the things that are great about Saw, but then it also makes some callbacks that just annoy you as a Saw fan, that make you wonder, does Chris Rock actually know the Saw lore? And again, I have to question if he's actually a Saw fan. So, I guess before I go on too long, trust me, I could go on for much longer, but I don't want this review to be any longer than it needs to be. I guess for a final score, I'll give it a 4 out of 10. I wanted to give it a 5, but there's just some parts of this movie that make my inner Saw fan just scream internally and wonder what were they thinking. I mean, this movie isn't completely god-awful, there is some enjoyable parts about it. I like the story as a concept. The concept is great, except for the fact that the story starts to slowly fall apart as it goes along. The characters are pretty solid for the most part. The traps are interesting and unique for the most part. The movie looks good. The soundtrack is pretty solid. There is some good stuff here, and when it does make a good callback, it does put a smile on your face. But then you take into account the lack of Tobin Bell, which is a huge problem. Seriously. never ever make a Saw movie without Tobin Bell ever again. If this is what Saw is like without Tobin Bell, no thank you. And Tobin Bell is starting to get old, okay? So take advantage of it while you have the chance, because as far as I'm concerned, once Tobin Bell goes, the Saw franchise is dead at that point as far as I'm concerned. So that's a huge problem for me. The unnecessary use of hip-hop music doesn't work for me. The comedy doesn't work because it's not freaking funny. The only moments that are even slightly entertaining on the comedy side is whenever Sam Jackson is on screen. And it's especially inexcusable when you considering that Chris Rock is a comedian. Like, come on. All the comedy just amounts to is just cheap references, okay? Again, there's a Twilight reference in Saw. Why? Get out of here with that shit. Okay? Just stop it. Fuck off with your humor. I don't want it in my Saw movie. Jeez. And again, the new Jigsaw copycat is just weak, okay? I mean, his motivation is interesting for the most part, but his overall plan makes no sense, and he's a piss-poor excuse for a Jigsaw knockoff. I know he's supposed to be a Jigsaw knockoff. He's not supposed to be one of his apprentices or anything. I get that, but he just sucks. That voice just pisses me off. So, yeah, there's just so much about this that just doesn't work for me. So, my final score is going to be a 4 out of 10. Maybe we'll see if my opinion changes over time, but my thoughts are this movie just face-planted more times than it succeeded. I get that they wanted to try something different, but for me, every time they tried something different, it just didn't work. And whenever they did something that was Saw-related, it was good. So, as far as I'm concerned, that just tells me, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, okay? So, yeah, what did you think of Spiral? Did you enjoy it? And if you're a fellow Saw fan, let me know what you thought of this as a Saw movie, because for me, this was a very weak Saw movie. And I'll see you guys around next time.